I'm going to be talking to Wendy Lambourne. Wendy is the founder and senior partner of Legitimate Leadership. Wendy has been working with these ideas for more than 30 years now, and has done this before. You won't be surprised to hear. Wendy finds this particularly engaging if you ask extremely difficult questions. So if you spend the next 30 minutes coming up with the most difficult question you can for Wendy, that would be appreciated by Wendy and ourselves. The insights we're going to share today are founded in research that was carried out in the 1980s, which is now more than 30 years ago. It was carried out by the Labour Research Organization in the Chamber of Mines, across a sample of 70,000 employees in that industry. Wendy will talk a little bit more about that research during the presentation, but what I'd like to say is that it has subsequently been applied, or the findings from that research and the insights from that research have been applied across 5 different continents in almost 30 countries in literally hundreds of organizations. I have recently had the great privilege of working with leaders from the US, leaders from the UK, and leaders from China, talking about what we're going to be talking about today. And I have established once again that, for myself, that this is a truly universal framework. And I look forward to hearing from Wendy as we get started. What I'm going to ask you to do is to please type questions into the chat. I'm going to ask Wendy to please follow through with the presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A session afterwards. But if you do have questions as they come up, please type them into the chat. Otherwise, we can simply have a conversation afterwards. Right, Wendy.
Right. Okay, Ian, thank you very much, and welcome everybody who's come here. And I know it's from near and far. There are clearly people from at least South Africa and the UK on the call, and maybe some other people further afield. Some of them are familiar faces. Some of them we haven't spoken to before. But let me just perhaps set the scene, if I may, with an explanation of how I really got involved in this framework. And it is a somewhat dramatic tale. I was employed at what was at the time, we're going back to the early 1990s, what was the biggest commercial explosives factory in the world at the time, somewhat outside of Johannesburg. You can get downtown in 35 minutes on a highway nowadays, but when this factory was first built, it would take you 2 days by ox cart to actually get to downtown Joburg. And in the early 1990s, we were in trouble with a capital T, and primarily with respect to safety. And this is a terrible thing, but true, that we had 2 explosions in the early 1990s. And as a result of those explosions, there were 14 fatalities. Now, we'd just been bought by a UK-based company, and our new owners clearly immediately appeared on the scene, literally pinned our ears to the wall and said the following, we don't kill people. So even though you've got 87% of the market and you're 130 years old, if you don't fix this, we'll close you down. So that was clearly a bit of a burning platform. And we sat as the management in this factory at the time, and this is going to sound fairly obvious in hindsight, but we just worked out the following, and it was simply this. If you've got a safety problem, you've got a people problem. Because 95% of all accidents are caused either by people not doing what they should do or doing what they shouldn't do. So take one step further. If you've got a people problem, then in fact you've got a leadership problem. And the absolute horrific insight for us at the time is if we've got a leadership problem, then we're the problem. And at the time we realized that we needed to fundamentally change the way we led. And it was from that perspective that we came across the framework. It didn't have a name at all back then. But basically the basic tenets which underpin this legitimate leadership framework were already there. And we referred to this as literally our golden thread. In other words, it was something we kept coming back to as we worked very diligently, not at changing the safety results, although obviously we wanted a different safety outcome. And we didn't work on changing our people, we worked on changing ourselves. And 3 years later, and this is the good news, obviously, we were literally recognized or acknowledged to be the safest commercial explosives factory in the world. And the fundamentally important thing about this was it was the same factory minus nitroglycerine. It was more or less the same people. The fundamental variable was the way we led them. So 30 years on now, I have never, ever not seen the change equation work as follows. Leaders change, then people change, then you get a different outcome. And it was my personal conviction of the power then of leading in this way that led me to leave the corporate world and actually embark on the next 30 years, working, my colleagues and I, with different companies around the world, helping the brave men and women. And I'd like to absolutely put that up front because this takes courage and it takes perseverance, but working with and enabling brave men and women across the world to actually lead in a way that's consistent with this framework. So what I'm going to do in the next 30 minutes, hopefully, is I'm going to basically explain this framework or give you an insight into what, in effect, this framework is arguing for. And I'm going to do that under the title, as you see on the slide, What Accounts for Trust in the Leadership of an Enterprise. Okay. Expect the findings and what I'm putting up front to be, in some instances, quite surprising. And then, if we've got time at the end, I would like to answer two questions. And the first one is, so if we've understood this thing about what accounts for trust in the leadership of the enterprise, how would you, as an individual, as a person in a position of authority, how would you gain trust? Because literally speaking, trust is gained one person at a time. So if you want management to be trusted, this literally translates into individual managers throughout the hierarchy need to be trusted by those that they exercise authority over. And the second question, if you want to implement a legitimate leadership framework, then collectively now or organizationally, there are essentially four fundamental shifts that you need to make. And if we've got time, we'll just go through what those shifts are. And then, as Ian says, let's talk about, and respond to people's questions and answers based on either their experience of the framework or, if this is your first time exposure to it, just what questions do you have? So we're going to start with a question, and the question is, so why then is it so important? Okay, Leonie, I think you've got an echo. Okay, has that stopped? Right. No, it hasn't. Is it me? Any better? Hope so. Okay. Any better? No, I'm echoing. Leonie, you're not on mute, and I think this might be interfering. Okay, better? Okay, let's try again. So the question I've got in the first instance is, why is it so important that there is trust in the leadership of an enterprise? And I think that essentially there are three reasons. And the first is that there is simply a corollary between the degree to which people trust management and their preparedness to go the extra mile. In other words, there is a cause and effect relationship between trust in management and employee willingness. So if you like, this framework is trying to put the finger on something which is quite elusive, which is essentially, why would employees go the extra mile? What unlocks in people their willingness? Secondly, trust in management is so important because trust in management is imperative if those in management or leadership roles want to change things. If there's high levels of trust, then leaders can literally lead their people through transformative change, and they'll have their people with them. If they don't trust management, or worse still, they distrust management, then what management experiences is that even very simple changes, things like changing shift patterns, becomes almost impossible to do. And the third reason why trust is so important is because this thing extends. If I trust management, I trust my colleagues. And because I trust my colleagues, I'm far more likely to collaborate rather than compete with them. So if, in fact, you want people to go the extra mile, if you want them to embrace change and you want them to collaborate rather than compete with each other, you have to answer this question: how do we actually increase trust in the management of an enterprise? So the next question really is, so what would you point to then, if you're in authority, as evidence of the degree to which you are actually trusted? In other words, what are the indicators of trust? And most people, when you ask them that question, say at the outset, well, obviously we point to the employee engagement survey. That tells us whether our people are engaged and willing, and hence trust management. And my view on this, provocatively perhaps, is to say I don't think an employee engagement survey tells you that. I think an employee engagement survey basically tells you how happy people are at work and what do they like and don't like, which makes them happy or unhappy at work. Okay. Now, people also point to metrics, and they're reasonably useful as well. Things like employee turnover, regrettable turnover, things like absenteeism, things like sick leave abuse, things like, let me say it, things like poor safety and other performance. And then people also point to anecdotal kind of evidence, like when management comes out from the boardroom and goes down into the organization, are they welcomed or do they scuttle for cover? I've certainly seen plenty of people scuttling for cover when management comes out for some bit of visible management, is what they tend to call it. Another useful indicator is, who do people take their problems to? If they trust management, they're going to take their problems and concerns to the person that they report to directly. If they don't trust management, they're going to take their problems and concerns elsewhere. And typically in a unionized environment, this means they take their problems and concerns to the union. So there's another way of establishing the degree to which you are really trusted as the management of an enterprise, and that is a more direct approach. And that approach is the one that was adapted or adopted in the gold mining area in South Africa, what Ian alluded to. The way of establishing how trusted management was simply to ask people. And, you know, this was in the day where we didn't have much in the way of computers. So this was boots on the ground, boots underground, literally these people operating under the auspices of the employer organization, the Chamber of Mines, went out into the industry, spoke to 70,000 miners and said simply this, or asked simply this: do you manage or do you trust the management of the enterprise? And they put the results of that answer onto a 21-point scale. If you can just show it, Ian, yeah. So in other words, plus 10 means that everybody who was asked this question responded with, we trust management totally. Minus 10 was the opposite view. And given the state of the industry at the time, and it was the dying years of apartheid South Africa, there was widespread management employee conflict in the industry, strike after strike, many of which were violent. And the presumption was, or assumption probably, is that you were going to get across the board low scores. In other words, 0 and below. And indeed, as you can see on the graph, there were mines where this was true. Management was not trusted. And yet, amazingly, certainly surprising at the time, there were also mines where management was highly trusted. And even more fascinating was on any one mine, you would get some shafts where management was highly trusted and other shafts where the opposite was true. Okay. So this gives you a clue already as to then what accounts for trust in management. And it clearly isn't how much you pay people. It isn't clearly what is your state of HR policies and systems and employee benefits. It really, we found this trust in management did not correlate with things of whether the mine was unionized or not. There was literally nothing that correlated with high trust in management other than, and we say this slightly tongue-in-cheek, other than the size of the HR function. And by the way, back then, the HR function was called the HR function. Now it's called the people function. And the correlation here was, interestingly, an inverse correlation, as in the lower the trust in management, the bigger size of the HR function. And there was a reason for that, which became apparent in due course. But the researchers, literally not being able to correlate anything with this high trust, then changed tack and asked a different question. And the question was this time, has trust changed? Has it improved? And if so, why so? Or has it deteriorated over, and the time frame was over the last 12 months? And again, if it's deteriorated, what is the reason for that? And literally, that is when the answer came. And the answer was as simple as this, was that managers, individually in the first instance, and then collectively, were essentially trusted or rejected on the basis of a single thing, and it was perception. That was the important thing. You can't tell people they need to trust you. They decide whether they trust you or not. And that conviction is based on one thing only. Are they convinced that you genuinely have their best interests at heart? Are you genuinely concerned with the well-being of your employees? And that was 30 years ago. And as Ian alluded to, we've repeated this trust research in many countries, in different industries, different organizations, and unfailingly, it's not that pay and benefits don't matter, but that isn't what accounts for trust. Okay. So let's take this a step further then and say, if we follow through, what do we mean by has their best interests at heart? And what we came to rely on and realize at the end was the next statement, if you can put up the slide, is what actually accounts for trust in management. What, in other words, as a leader, you stand or fall on the basis of is something that we've come to term as intent. Intent or motive. Okay. Now, bear with me while I explain this intent thing, because it's not obvious. You can't see intent, you can't see motive, but people deduce motive. And this is true in any human interaction. In other words, this is not only true in a vertical relationship between managers and their direct reports, it's also true between colleagues in a team or across teams, and even in a customer-supplier relationship. Okay. In other words, in any human interaction, we judge the other person not on the basis of what they do, but on the basis of how we read their motive behind what they do. And it may seem a somewhat crass example, but if a robber apprehended you in the dark and proceeded to attack you with a knife, if you were able to, you would fight, resist this person any way you could. But at the same time, people are prepared to literally willingly submit themselves to the surgeon's knife. Now, either which way, you can't be enjoying the experience. But why people submit to a surgeon's knife but resist that of the robber is simply because what they intuitively know is this surgeon is doing this not very nice thing to them to help them and to heal them, whereas the robber is doing exactly the same thing, but in this instance in pursuit of self-interest. So the first insight that came from this was simply this, that in order to lead, the last thing you need to do is be nice. Okay. In other words, people have no problem if your behavior is hard, if you're not nice, as long as they're convinced that you are actually doing this not nice to them as the surgeon is in your best interests. Okay, so we took that a step further and said then, very simplistically, if you like, what is we saying here? We're saying that essentially what intent about is, are you in the relationship to give to your people, or are you in the relationship to get something out of them? Okay, and let me illustrate that with an example. So let's say that we're sitting in a room, me and everyone else on the call. This is not a virtual call. And I notice that Rachel, for example, has arrived and she hasn't got a pen with her to write on today. So I pick up a legitimate leadership pen and I go across to Rachel. I say, Rachel, listen, you haven't got a pen today. Here, please be my guest. It's my pen, but please not only use it today, you don't have to give it back. Situation one. Situation two, conversely, I have Dieter sitting in the room, also without a pen. This time I go to him and I say, Dieter, you haven't got a pen today. Here, legitimate leadership pen. Please take it. Please use it. You don't have to give it back. But Dieter, if I give you this pen, then I need you to agree with everything that I say today. Okay, now, if you think about this again, if there was a camera in the corner of the room, the camera sees me doing exactly the same thing. I'm giving Rachel a pen and I'm giving Dieter a pen. But in order to understand motive, we have to ask, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this with Dieter so that Dieter now feels obligated to agree with everything I say? Why am I doing it with Rachel? I'm doing this because she needs a pen and I'm trying to be helpful to her. So the interesting further thought then is, when you are giving, or only when you are giving unconditionally, are you actually giving? When you're giving to get, as is the case with Dieter, I'm not giving, I'm actually taking. This is just the investment I'm making to get out of Dieter what I want from him tomorrow. Okay, so people go the extra mile for a leader who they're convinced is in the relationship to give with them, who in essence is prepared to put their people's interests before their own interests. But the next question, fairly obviously, is what is this give if the give is not money? And we answered that question by asking another question, which Ian has just put up on the screen. And the question was, and let's sort of paraphrase this for a moment, we do know that people will go above and beyond for something worth going above and beyond for. In other words, if there's a sufficiently compelling purpose, people will align themselves behind it and be prepared, if you like, to give for a cause. People are also prepared to give for something that they have a passion for. So if you like, I'm just absolutely passionate about the work that I do, and for that reason, I'll go above and beyond. But at the end of the day, people ultimately go the extra mile, not for something, they go the extra mile for someone. That someone is the person that they would report to directly. And hence, we went out into the world and we asked this question: who is this person that you would work for willingly? And we've asked that question of people all over the world in different companies and very significantly at different levels in the organization. And we'll come back to this in a moment. The astounding finding was that it doesn't matter who you ask this question of, the answer is universal. So to be graphic, if you ask this question of semi-literate people who shovel rock for a living 3.8 kilometers underground on a South African gold mine, their answer to that question is the same as if you ask somebody who was, say, the CEO of the second biggest cell phone company in Thailand. So it's universal. Let's put up a typical list. These are the kinds of things that people say when you ask them this question: who would you work for willingly? And what is first of all noticeable about this is that whilst there are things related to ability or skill, like is this person knowledgeable, is this person experienced, is this person competent, the vast majority of words that are put up there, or requirements, if you like, of people in leadership roles, are not about their skill, it's literally about their will. In other words, if you like, as someone in authority, you choose or you decide whether you're going to be approachable, whether you're going to be kind, whether you're going to be understanding, whether you're going to be humane, whether you're going to have challenging goals for people, whether you're going to set an example for others to follow or not. And this is great news, because what it means is the very thing that people are looking for is absolutely within the gift of managers to provide. It is literally a matter of choice. So we scrutinized this list over and over and over, and we ended up saying, this whole list does, at the end of the day, distill or boil down to essentially 2 drops of essence. 2 themes, if you like, emerge from this. In other words, what gives you willingness is not arbitrary and it's not vague. It's actually extremely concrete, and it is consistent. And the first thing that makes people trust you or be prepared to go the extra mile is, if you see the items in blue, essentially these things like approachable, empathetic, kind, supportive, compassionate, understanding, these words have a sort of almost a softness about them. There's a nurturing theme that runs through these words, and we've chosen to call this first theme care. And the important thing about care is that it's only care if it is unconditional. In other words, I will work willingly for somebody who genuinely and sincerely cares about me as a human being, not as a human resource, and who cares about me not just because I make their bottom line grow. So that's the soft theme. The hard theme, on the other hand, comes through in the first instance, the word honest with me. And if, for example, Ian was my boss and Ian was unfailingly and unflinchingly honest with me, which he is, by the way, so I can testify to this, he has to say something to me at a point in time that I don't enjoy hearing very much, simply because no one this side of the grave is perfect. So it's obvious why you want somebody to be compassionate and supportive and kind, But why do I want something like this honesty, which is somewhat harder for me to accept? And the simple answer to that, and it's up on the screen, I want Ian to be honest with me, because if he isn't honest with me, I don't know what I need to change. I don't know what I need to improve. And hence, I don't grow. So the second theme is the growth theme, and it comes in words like this person coaches me, teaches me, gives me opportunities, stretches me, those kind of words. It comes through on words like knowledgeable and experience, because, I can't learn from somebody who doesn't have greater knowledge and experience than I do. And it also comes through in things like, I think, provides clear direction. And this is an interesting one, because if you don't give people clarity of direction, if you don't tell people where you're trying to go, they literally go round and round in circles. They don't progress and they don't move forward. And we worked with a company once in a very volatile environment, and people said to senior management, just tell us where we're going. And you know what? If 6 months later you said, I told you we were going east, sorry, we're now going west, that's fine. Just as long as you give us the clarity in the short term. And then the final one, which is interesting, is I want to work with somebody who sets an example or has high standards. Now, someone who sets an example and high standards, interestingly, has high standards for themselves in the first instance, but equally they have high standards for you. Now, that makes it not a particularly comfortable thing to report to this person, because they will be demanding. They will insist on excellence. They'll accept nothing less than the best that you can be. But why do we want that? We want this because we realize that unless this person insists on me being the best that I can be, the best of me will not be realized. Okay, so we said, next intriguing question, why is this the universal answer? Anywhere in the world you care to go, from Sweden to South Africa to Korea to Mexico, people say, I will only work willingly for somebody who cares for and grows me. And people's natural response at this point is to say, well, surely care and growth are human needs. And in truth, they absolutely are human needs. I mean, who doesn't want to be cared for? Who wouldn't like to realize the best in themselves? But the penny dropped when we realized, well, hold on a moment. In the context of this question, really, care and growth are not just needs, they're actually expectations that we hold of anyone in authority. We literally expect nothing less than that. This is what we require from people in authority. If, in fact, we're going to perceive these people in authority as legitimate, if, in fact, we're going to be prepared to let these people actually exercise authority over us. And this makes sense when you think about the very first relationship of power that we experience in life. That's between our parents and ourselves. Good parents care and grow their children. Good teachers do this. Good managers do this. And hold our breath as we go to the polls in South Africa tomorrow. Good governments actually also care for and grow the citizens in the land. Okay, so in plain English, then, you can pay people as much as you like. But if, in fact, you don't deliver on care and growth, they'll never be willing. Okay, so let's now put this into the context, if you like, of an organization. And in an organization, we have people in authority. And clearly, if you can show that, thanks, Ian, the higher up the line you go, obviously, the more authority you have. Okay, the CEO just does have more authority than a person in a first-line manager role. Now, in an organizational context, and we did this, Leanne and I, literally a few weeks ago in a fashion retail organization, we got hold of somebody who was an area manager in the room, and we said to this person, so you're meeting with your operations manager, what is it that you have to account for? And straight out of his mouth, the guy said, I need to tell this person about growth in revenue. I need to tell this person about stop losses. I need to tell this person about net, what's it called, NPS, in other words, customer satisfaction. In other words, I need to account for the results in my area. And simply put, I'm an area manager. I don't actually serve customers in a store, in a shopping mall. So I've got to look to my store managers to give me the results that I can feed up the line to the ops manager, who can feed up the line to the ops director, who can finally feed this up to the CEO of this particular brand. And ultimately, guess what? The CEO or the head of business also has to account for these results. But in this instance, they have to account for these results up to global or corporate head office. And when you look at this as a picture, hopefully what strikes you between the eyes is the core problem. And the core problem is that the line of service is in the wrong direction. Okay, everybody is busy, from the employee to the supervisor, to the manager, to the CEO, literally serving up the line. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is management, not leadership. Okay. Now, across the world, I say 85%. There are, if you like, exceptions to this. But the vast majority of managers in organizations, when you ask them, what are you here to do and for what purpose? The response is, I'm here to get results out of people. That's what I'm measured on. That's what I'm rewarded for. And hence, answer, don't be surprised if that's your view of your role. If people experience you, the people who report to you experience you as being here to take, rather than being here to give. Okay. Now, there's a second problem with this picture, and the problem is that there is someone actually missing from this picture. That somebody is the all-important customer, he/she, who is king. And it really doesn't matter what is the nature of your business. The bottom line is, if the people in the front line of the business don't give the customer what the customer wants, you will never have sustainable, positive organization results. Okay. So in our view, and in view of this model anyway, we believe the most important people in an organization are not the people at the top of the organization. It's absolutely the people in the front line directly interfacing with a customer, whether that is an internal or an external customer. And this perspective, we believe, has literally just simply put the finger on what would make somebody in the front line willing. And the answer is, I will only be willing someone in the front line if what I get from my manager is care and growth. And this is true at every single level in the hierarchy. Don't expect your first line managers or supervisors to be willing to go above and beyond if they don't experience care and growth from the person they belong to. In other words, if managers are here to get results out of people, leaders are concerned with giving care and growth to their people. Okay. And by the way, not for philanthropic reasons, it's because the end goal of people that you grow is people who are exceptional people. In other words, the leadership job at the end of the day is to cultivate excellence in people. And if you do that, then the results will take care of themselves. Okay, so to give you a very basic example from our explosives factory, at the outset, when we started to work with our managers in the business, if you said to a production foreman at the time, what is your job? He said production. I mean, isn't the dead giveaway in the job title? And if you think about it a moment, but hold on, whose job is production? The answer is the operator's job. And it took a while to get there. And I can't say in all honesty that any foreman ever actually used these words. But eventually people shifted to actually a point of saying, no, my job is to cultivate the best explosives manufacturers in the world. I do that, they'll take care of the results. Okay, so I wonder if I should just pause here for a moment to take some questions before I then answer the two final questions. How do you cultivate then trust in an individual manager, as an individual manager? How do you cultivate trust in you? And then secondly, how do you actually cultivate trust? How do you actually, what are the four fundamental shifts you need to make if you're going to cultivate this trust in management throughout an enterprise? Okay, any questions, Ian? Anything in the
Right. We don't have any questions in the chat at the moment, but I did get one question from previously, Wendy, and that was, what are the telltale signs that a leader would be able to persist with legitimate leadership even as others regress over time? And, I've seen leaders who 10 years after they went through this framework still get it and still practice, and other people forget by Tuesday.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. And there was somebody who I was hoping to be on the call because they did register today. They were exposed to this leadership framework 30 years ago when they were in a sort of a middle management role in an organization. They're now on the executive team, and they've literally said, I've only ever led like this for the last 20 years. Okay. And personally, I must say, I only came across this framework when I was 39. And I have to honestly say that I'd done all manner of damage to people in the first sort of 15 years of my career or life in a leadership role. I just wish somebody had got hold of me much earlier on and given me this insight. This is actually the job. The job is not to get results out of people. The job is to actually care for and cultivate exceptional people. But let's go back to the hierarchy picture, if we may, for a moment, Ian. Because if what we've indicated here is what's required from you, literally, is as somebody in a leadership role, it's not a change in style, and it's not a change in behavior even necessarily. What's required is almost, I like to put it this way, a change of heart. Or in terms of this framework, you need to change your intent from being here to get to being here to give. Okay. And the obvious question that arises from this is, so who needs to change first? And most people, when you ask them that question, point immediately to the CEO. And really their view is this thing has to be led from the top. And I totally agree that if it is led from the top, if it's exemplified by the person at the top of the organization, implementing this framework is absolutely accelerated. Undoubtedly, first prize. But in the real world, I'm afraid to say, it's not that it's rare, but there are far more instances where it's not, unfortunately, exemplified from the top. So the answer to the question, who needs to change first, I have to say, is actually me. And in other words, if this is a choice we make, whether we're in the relationship to give or to take, the only person who can ultimately make that choice is you. Now, if you've got a leader who's caring and growing you, it makes it easier to care and grow your people. But if you unfortunately have a leader who isn't doing this for you, I'm afraid you're not off the hook. It's harder, but it doesn't mean that you don't still have a responsibility for doing this for the people who report to you.
Wendy, I had a conversation earlier today actually where somebody asked me, who are your competitors in the leadership development space? And I said, we're not in the leadership development space, we're in the organization transformation space. Mm. Our job is about changing organizations. It just so happens that leaders lead that change, and that is where the change happens.
Yeah. So Ian, please just put up then that last slide on what are the 4 shifts that need to take place. Okay. If you're going to transform your organization in this way, the first thing you need to do is you need to shift the line of service from you're here to serve me to I'm here to serve you. And that has to happen at every single level in the line of command. I mean, it doesn't help if the CEO is there to serve his executive team if somewhere lower down in the hierarchy, managers are not equally there for their people as opposed to the other way around. Okay. The next shift then is to say that, is this an individual manager or is it the transformation? I can't see clearly on the screen, Ian. I can't see what's written on the screen. Ah, right. This is the individual, not the organization. Do we have a slide on the organization? Right. Invert the line of service. Cultivate legitimate relationships of power at every level. Make the end exceptional people, not results. And there's perhaps the hardest one of all. If you do this, then you have to ultimately change what leaders are measured on and rewarded for. What leaders should be measured and rewarded for is not the results. They need to be measured and rewarded for the caliber of their people. Okay, and actually, over a period of time, you can absolutely deliver on all 4 of these key shifts.
Wendy, and just in closing, I think it's worth putting the last slide up and just talk about what this change ultimately delivers.
Yes, so this change in leadership does not, and I need to say this, it doesn't impact on the results directly. Okay. But when you implement this framework, what happens over time is you impact positively on those 4 things. Okay. In other words, the first is legitimacy. In other words, you increase the number of people in authority who are perceived to be legitimate simply because they're paying this price for power, which is care and growth. Secondly, trust increases, and this is not only trust in the vertical, also trust horizontally, simply because people are convinced that others in the organization are acting in their best interests. Thirdly, you increase contribution. Now, when I ask people in an organization, for example, give me the percentage split between your high contributors or excellent contributors, people who are acceptable in terms of the contribution they're making, and poor contributors. And what happens when you apply this framework is that those percentages change over time. Simply put, you get more high contributors and fewer poor contributors because, let me say this, the poor contributors have either exited the organization or, in fact, they've been helped and enabled to become acceptable contributors. And the final one, and it is significant because I think accountability is an issue in most organizations. It's the thing that people sort of are concerned about most. When you get this right, you get people in your organization throughout the organization who take accountability or ownership. And secondly, they're held accountable for the contribution they make.
Wendy, we are out of time. I'm going to leave everyone with what I think is quite an optimistic thought. I was in a school over the weekend and I saw a poster which stated the Big Brother program developing future leaders. And in this school, the Big Brother program is about taking what used to be prefects and kind of dominance and enforcing rules, etc., to being a program where grade sevens are asked to look after and support, read, care, and grow grade noughts and make sure that they have a wonderful time. And if people can learn this at the age of 12, then I'm sure we can get it right in our organizations one day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I hope you have a good Tuesday afternoon.